Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
So let me say it as simply as I can. Yes, in full accordance with the law, and in order to prevent terrorist attacks on the United States and to save American lives, the United States government conducts targeted strikes against specific al-Qaeda terrorists, sometimes using remotely piloted aircraft, often referred to publicly as drones.
President Obama prepares to nominate John Brennan to head the CIA. Dubbed the assassination czar, Brennan has played a key role backing some of the nation's most controversial post-9/11 policies, from the secret drone war to extraordinary rendition to wireless surveillance. Plus, we'll look at Obama's nominee to head the Pentagon, former Republican Senator Chuck Hagel. Fellow Republicans have criticized him for views on Iraq, Iran, and Israel. Then the Steubenville rape case in Ohio.
We are anonymous. We are NightSec. Around mid-August 2012, a party took place in a small town in Ohio known as Steubenville. At this party are a list of men named in the preliminary docs below who took part in the kidnapping and rape of a 15-year-old girl.
The hacker activist group Anonymous has helped expose new details about a horrific high school gang rape case involving football players in Ohio. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Up to 18 people have been killed in the latest U.S. drone attacks on Pakistan's tribal areas. The strikes hit what Pakistani officials described as separate compounds belonging to the Pakistani Taliban in South Waziristan. A Taliban commander was reportedly among the dead. The ongoing drone attacks come days after a federal judge ruled the Obama administration's under no obligation to publicly disclose its legal justification. The American Civil Liberties Union and the New York Times had filed a lawsuit under the Freedom of Information Act demanding the U.S. government disclose the legal basis for launching drone strikes overseas. The suit was filed after the U.S. killed the American-born cleric Anwar al-Awlaki in Yemen, despite having never charged him with a crime. In upholding the Obama administration's right to secrecy, U.S. District Judge Colleen McMahon expressed misgivings about the drone program itself, writing, quote, "I can find no way around the thicket of laws and precedents that effectively allow the executive branch to proclaim as perfectly lawful certain actions that seem on their face incompatible with our Constitution and laws while keeping the reasons for their conclusion a secret." McMahon continued, "I can only conclude the government has not violated the Freedom of Information Act by refusing to turn over the documents and so cannot be compelled by this court of law to explain in detail the reasons why its actions do not violate the Constitution and laws of the United States. The Alice in Wonderland nature of this pronouncement is not lost on me," the judge wrote. Some of the first details have emerged on the White House's effort to tackle gun control in the aftermath of last month's shooting massacre in Newtown, Connecticut. The Washington Post reports the task force overseen by Vice President Joe Biden's mulling proposals, including reinstatement of the expired ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, universal background checks for all gun buyers, a database to track the trajectory of firearms nationwide, more detailed mental health checks, and harsher penalties for carrying a gun near a school or giving one to minors. In a nod to the influence of the National Rifle Association, the administration's reportedly hoping to counter NRA opposition by convincing gun retailers such as Walmart that the new measures would help their profits by curbing sales at gun shows. News of the proposal comes after yet another shooting in Aurora, Colorado, site of the nation's second worst gun rampage last year after Newtown. A gunman killed 3 people in an Aurora, Colorado home on Saturday before being shot dead by police. Aurora's where suspect James Holmes allegedly killed 12 people and wounded 58 others during a midnight movie screening in July. An Aurora police spokesperson described the latest shooting.
We kept persisting on him coming out, him surrendering. He did not. And then he came to a second-story window with a gun and fired upon us a second time. This time shots were returned. The suspect was hit, and he has been pronounced dead. We've sent people in and have confirmed that there were 3 other victims inside who have all been pronounced dead at this time.
Colorado is set to open its largest shooting range to date, the Cheyenne Mountain Shooting Complex near Colorado Springs, later this month. 3 weeks after the Newtown massacre, former Democratic Congressmember Gabrielle Giffords of Arizona has been among the latest visitors to the grieving Connecticut town. Giffords suffered major head injuries and nearly lost her life in the Tucson shooting rampage that killed 6 people 2 years ago this month. On Friday, Gabby Giffords met with Newtown officials before visiting with families of the Newtown victims. President Obama has signed into law a measure providing $9.7 billion in initial federal aid for victims of Superstorm Sandy. The House approved the bill Friday after House Speaker John Boehner canceled a vote on a wider $60 billion package, a move that sparked harsh criticism. As a smaller bill advanced on the House floor, Democratic Congressmember Steny Hoyer of Maryland, Nydia Velázquez of New York denounced Boehner's decision.
While it is never too late to do the right thing, it is late that we are doing this thing, and we are doing only the bare minimum.
It is indefensible that as Americans continue to suffer from Sandy's impact, that the House majority could not get their act together to bring the entire Senate-passed package to a vote.
House Speaker Boehner says he'll bring the remaining $51 billion in Sandy relief to a vote on January 15th. President Obama is expected to unveil the nomination today of former Republican Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska as the next Secretary of Defense, replacing Leon Panetta. A Vietnam War veteran, 3-term member of the Senate, Hagel has faced criticism from right-wing foes over his positions on Israel and dealings with Iran, as well as from progressive critics for making denigrating comments in 1998 about gays in government, for which he only recently apologized. Speaking on NBC's Meet the Press, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell vowed a tough confirmation process for Hagel.
I think it'll be a lot of tough questions of Senator Hagel, but he'll be treated fairly by Republicans in the Senate. His views with regard to Israel, for example, and Iran and all the other positions that he's taken over the years will be, I think, very much a matter of discussion during the confirmation process.
During today's news conference, President Obama is also expected to announce the nomination of counterterrorism advisor John Brennan to head the CIA. Brennan was a rumored pick for the job when Obama was first elected in 2008, but was forced to withdraw from consideration amidst protests over his role at the CIA under the Bush administration. Brennan has publicly supported the CIA's policies of so-called enhanced interrogation techniques and extraordinary rendition. He was also the first Obama administration official to publicly confirm drone attacks overseas and to defend their legality. We'll have more on the expected nominations of Chuck Hagel and John Brennan after headlines. The Obama administration's reportedly now considering keeping a residual force of between 3,000 and 9,000 troops in Afghanistan after the formal withdrawal date of 2014. The Wall Street Journal cited the new figures after previous reports suggested the U.S. is mulling a troop deployment of up to 20,000. Bahrain's top court has upheld the convictions of 13 opposition leaders on allegations of plotting to overthrow the U.S.-backed regime. The activists were sentenced by a military court in 2011, 8 of them to life behind bars after leading massive protests against Bahrain's Sunni monarchy. Today's ruling marks the end of their legal options after an appeals court upheld the convictions in September. Another 7 activists were also convicted in the initial case but did not file appeals because they were tried in absentia. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is vowing to continue his government's fight against rebel groups while ruling out talks with the armed opposition. In his first public address in 6 months, Assad called Syrian rebels a tool of foreign intervention.
We are now in a state of war in every sense of the word. We are now confronting a vicious external war. This form of war is more fragmenting and more dangerous than conventional war because it does not utilize its equipment to hit us, but it pulls us into carrying out its plans. This war targets Syria using a handful of Syrians and many foreigners. It's trying to use us to tear down our trees and destroy our foundations. And it is with pity that this is happening with the help from some of our own.
Assad said he's open to dialogue, but only with those opposition groups tolerated by his regime. His appearance came days after the United Nations reported the death toll from nearly 2 years of fighting in Syria has reached around 60,000. In the rebel-held city of Aleppo, a Syrian resident said his fellow citizens don't trust Assad.
Any normal citizen listening to his speech heard him say that he asks for the refugees to return to their homes. At the same time, he says he will not be deterred in fighting terrorism. How can a citizen go back to his home when at the same time Assad forces are attacking them with missiles and tanks? There is a great contradiction in his speech. We're at a point where citizens don't believe a word he says.
In India, 5 men accused in the gang rape and death of a 23-year-old woman have appeared in court for the first time. The unidentified victim was raped on a moving bus in New Delhi last month, dying from her injuries 2 weeks later. The case has sparked nationwide call for reforms to increase punishment for rapists and prevent legal cases from languishing. At a candlelight vigil in India on Sunday, hundreds of women paid tribute to the victim and demanded government action.
I don't know how much of security will come in even after all this is being done, but I hope somewhere or the other in the minds of some people, some little bit of awareness will come, some bit of consciousness will come.
Later in today's Democracy Now! Broadcast, we will look at a rape that took place in Steubenville, Ohio, a gang rape of a young high school student by football players. South Africa has deployed up to 400 soldiers to the Central African Republic in a bid to help the government defeat a rebel advance. The Seleka rebels have claimed a series of victories in recent weeks after accusing the government of violating a 2007 peace accord. Several other African countries, including neighboring Chad, have sent troops to help fight the rebels. Speaking from the capital, Bangui, Ellen van der Velden of Doctors Without Borders said the Central African Republic's turmoil marks a silent crisis.
So far we have labeled the crisis in the Central African Republic as a silent one because of the very poor health indicators that already existed, surpassing crisis indicators, while at the same time there was very limited attention for this crisis. There is, even before the current crisis broke out, already very few development NGOs or support or business, and this country already at the best of times many people could have done with a lot of help, and that situation has only become more complicated.
The Central African Republic's among the poorest countries in the world, despite having deposits of gold, diamonds and uranium, which are mined by foreign interests. Canada's Idle No More movement expanded to the U.S. border Saturday with a series of blockades and actions. Police closed the international bridge connecting Ontario with Michigan after hundreds of protesters marched from the U.S. to the Canadian side. Sit-ins and protests were also held at bridges, roads, rail lines and other border crossings across Canada. The actions came one day after Chief Theresa Spence announced she would join a meeting between Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper and First Nations leaders. Spence has been on hunger strike since December 11th, demanding a meeting with Harper, an action that has helped spur the Idle No More movement's broader call for political transformation, Indigenous rights and environmental justice. Idle No More organizers have called for a global day of action January 11th, the same day that Spence is slated to meet with Harper and the one-month anniversary of her hunger strike. In labor news, 2 major healthcare unions have announced a merger after previously teaming up against the health giant Kaiser Permanente. The 85,000-member California Nurses Association will join the 10,000-member National Union of Healthcare Workers, or NUWH, for a new union entirely of workers in the health sector. Both unions have waged strikes against Kaiser in the last 2 years. The move's expected to stoke tensions with the 2 million-member Service Employees International Union, with plans already in place to recruit the SEIU's Kaiser Permanente workers in California. The SEIU defeated the NUHW in a bitterly contested vote among Kaiser Permanente's California workers in 2011, but the National Labor Relations Board called for a new election after finding the SEIU had colluded with Kaiser to influence the outcome. And the notorious Tams Supermax prison in Illinois has officially closed its doors following the transfer of the last of its prisoners. Prisoners' advocates and family members led a campaign for the shuttering of Tams, citing harsh conditions that included the use of long-term solitary confinement for a decade or longer. Illinois Governor Pat Quinn announced its closure last year, citing budgetary concerns. In a statement, the American Civil Liberties Union's National Prison Project praised the closure of Tams, saying, quote, Tams symbolize the ever more punitive, dehumanizing, and ineffective state of our criminal justice system, where entire institutions are built to hold prisoners in extreme solitary confinement. Its closure is a major victory, first and foremost, because of solitary's abhorrent and terrifying psychological consequences, the ACLU wrote. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Obama is expected today to nominate John Brennan as the next director of the Central Intelligence Agency and former Republican Senator Chuck Hagel as Defense Secretary. But we begin by looking at John Brennan, 25-year CIA veteran who currently serves as Obama's top counterterrorism advisor. Brennan's played a key role in the expansion of Obama's secret drone war and has been dubbed by some to be the, quote, assassination czar. Brennan was a rumored pick for the job when Obama was first elected in 2008, but was forced to withdraw from consideration amidst protest over his role at the CIA under George W. Bush. Brennan had publicly supported the CIA's policies of so-called enhanced interrogation techniques and extraordinary rendition. Joining us now by Democracy Now! Video stream is Marcy Wheeler, an investigative blogger who has written extensively about John Brennan. She runs the website emptywheel.net. She joins us from Michigan. Marcy, welcome to Democracy Now! Tell us who John Brennan is.
So if Barack Obama had the equivalent of a Dick Cheney, so somebody who is involved in all of the national security decisions, is the last person to speak to Obama before he makes these decisions, if we trust him, if we believe he actually asks Obama these decisions, the one who has centralized almost all of these decisions under himself, it would be John Brennan. So since in Obama's first term, Brennan has been the one who has been at Obama's side for all of these national security decisions.
I want to turn to John Brennan's remarks last May when he publicly confirmed the United States has used drones to conduct targeted killings overseas.
President Obama believes that done carefully, deliberately, and responsibly, we can be more transparent and still ensure our nation's security. So let me say it as simply as I can. Yes, in full accordance with the law, and in order to prevent terrorist attacks on the United States and to save American lives, the United States government conducts targeted strikes against specific al-Qaeda terrorists, sometimes using remotely piloted aircraft, often referred to publicly as drones. And I'm here today because President Obama has instructed us to be more open with the American people about these efforts.
That's John Brennan, who President Obama, it is said, will be nominating to be head of the CIA. Marcy Wheeler, these comments.
Well, what your listeners should know, first of all, is that John Brennan has lied explicitly about drones in the past. In 2011, 2010, he basically said there had been no civilian casualties at all from drones. So when John Brennan makes public statements, he also had a famous press conference right after the killing of Osama bin Laden where he made a lot of misleading statements as well. So when John Brennan says something, you shouldn't necessarily believe John Brennan, and we know from what he said in that speech there were specific details that were inaccurate. So Obama's notion of being transparent with John Brennan, a proven liar, doesn't fly. Moreover, given that we know now, we didn't know when he made that speech, that John Brennan is the guy who's basically, like I said, the last decision maker before Obama signs off on drone strikes or not, he has a pretty big incentive to spin the process in such a way that he's protected legally. Because if, in fact, they're not using rules, as they appear not to be in all cases, that would abide by international law, he's at quite a bit of exposure. So now we can go out there and claim to be transparent and make this speech about these great standards they're using which they're not, because that, the speech he made doesn't account for signature strikes, which involve patterns rather than specific intelligence. And it protects him, but it's not transparency. And the administration has repeatedly refused to be transparent about the most basic issues with regards to their program.
Last May, John Brennan was the target of a protest by Medea Benjamin of Code Pink. She disrupted his speech as John Brennan defended U.S. drone strikes.
Over the years.
Well, how many people are you willing to sacrifice? Why are you lying to the American people and not saying how many innocents have been killed?
Thank you, ma'am, for expressing your views. There will be time for questions and answers after the presentation.
In Pakistan, who is killed because he wanted to document the drone strikes. I speak out on behalf of Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, 16-year-old born in Denver, killed in Yemen just because his father was someone we don't like. I speak out on behalf of the Constitution, on behalf of the rule of law. I love the rule of law. I love my country. You are making us less safe by killing so many innocent people.
That was Medea Benjamin of Code Pink as she was carried out of the hearing by security. Marcy Wheeler, what Brennan was saying and what Medea Benjamin was protesting.
Well, Medea Benjamin referenced two 16-year-olds who were killed, one of whom is a Pakistani who was an activist basically against drone strikes, and shortly after he made some public statements, he died in a drone strike. The second one is Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, who, as she said, was an American citizen, and he was killed in a drone strike just a couple weeks after his father. And it's funny because there's been recent comments since where people in the administration, of course, anonymous people say, oh, well, that was an outrageous mistake, killing Awlaki's son. But in fact, under the rules that Brennan totes as being so protective, military-aged males, Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki was 16, are considered militia unless they're proven not to be. So that's the kind of standards we're using. And, whatever the story is for why Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki was killed, what you have is, an American citizen who there's no known tie to terrorism who got killed in one of our drone strikes, presumably because he's a teenager and we consider teenagers legitimate targets.
What about John Brennan's role under George W. Bush?
Right. So he was George Tenet's chief of staff and then went on to be kind of the precursor to what's now called the National Counterterrorism Center. And in that role, he touched the early moments of the torture program and I think more importantly, was involved in the targeting for Cheney's illegal warrantless wiretapping program when it was working without any legal sanction at all. So as you said at the top of this story, Brennan was considered unacceptable 4 years ago to lead the CIA. Since then, we've learned about his role in the illegal wiretapping program. We've learned about his role in drone strikes, and yet now he's supposed to be an acceptable candidate. I don't understand how. I guess that's a testament to what kind of hard-nosed person Barack Obama has become and the degree to which his policies really are just a continuation of the Bush-Cheney policies.
Marcy Wheeler, I want to thank you for being with us, investigative blogger who runs the website EmptyWheel.net, joining us from Michigan. We will continue to follow this news as we broadcast now. Word has just come down that President Obama will nominate John Brennan to be head of the CIA. When we come back from break, we'll look at his other nominee today, Chuck Hagel, the former senator of Nebraska, to head defense. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute. Watch Goulash here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn now to look at Chuck Hagel, President Obama is expected to nominate the former Republican senator from Nebraska to become the next defense secretary. Hagel is a Vietnam veteran who represented Nebraska in the Senate from 1997 to 2009. He may face an uphill nomination battle due to opposition from fellow Republicans. After initially supporting the Iraq invasion, he later joined Democrats criticizing the war. He also supported cuts to the military budget. Several prominent Republican lawmakers and commentators have criticized Hagel's past comments about Israel. In 2008, he was quoted as saying, quote, "I'm not an Israeli senator, I'm a United States senator," and, quote, "the Jewish lobby intimidates a lot of people up here," unquote. Well, on Sunday, South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham criticized Hagel on CNN.
Chuck Hagel is out of the mainstream of thinking, I believe, on most issues regarding foreign policy. I expect the president to nominate people different than I would think. I'm going to vote for Senator Kerry. I don't agree with him a lot, but I think he's very much in the mainstream of thought. Chuck Hagel, if confirmed to be Secretary of Defense, would be the most antagonistic Secretary of Defense toward the state of Israel in our nation's history. Not only has he said you should directly negotiate with Iran, sanctions won't work, that Israel must negotiate with Hamas, a organization, terrorist group that lobs thousands of rockets into Israel. He also was one of 12 senators who refused to sign a letter to the European Union trying to designate Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. He has long severed his ties with the Republican Party. This is an in-your-face nomination by the president to all of us who are supportive of Israel. I don't know what his management experience is regarding the Pentagon, little if any, so I think it's an incredibly controversial choice.
Speaking to Meet the Press last month, President Obama defended Senator Hagel's record.
I've served with Chuck Hagel. I know him. He is a patriot. He is somebody who has done extraordinary work both in the United States Senate, somebody who served this country with valor in Vietnam, and is somebody who's currently serving on my Intelligence Advisory Board and doing an outstanding job.
Well, to talk more about the nomination of former Senator Republican Chuck Hagel as Secretary of Defense, we're joined now by Ali Gharib. He's senior editor for Open Zion, a Middle East blog on the Daily Beast website. He's been following the controversy around Hagel's nomination today in his writings. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Ali.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Talk about the controversy around Hagel being named today by President Obama, or nominated.
Well, the administration floated his name last month, and since then there's been sort of a firestorm of criticism that's come mostly from right-wing Republicans, but also a little bit from pro-Israel Democratic hawks. That's been based around his views on Israel, his views on Iran, some comments he made about a decade and a half ago about a gay nominee to be ambassador, and then also just in general a right-wing Republican conservative voting record in his 2 terms in the Senate. And so all these attacks have been coming for about a month now, and just at the end of the month, Obama finally defended him, and we found out on Friday that he was confirmed to be the likely nominee probably today, maybe tomorrow morning.
So talk about his record. What is the controversy about? I mean, talking about the 3 I's here: Israel, Iran, Iraq.
Yeah, so a lot of Republicans, there's been a lot of articles written recently that say that Republicans don't like him because he was the first major Republican figure to turn on the Iraq war. And in fact, he did vote to authorize the war, but was more skeptical than most going in. It was reported that he voiced a lot of private concerns about that. And then going on to Israel, he actually has a mainstream voting record where he's voted to, for example, support military aid for Israel, but he's spoken critically about some Israeli policies, and he's also refused to do the kind of posturing and preening that a lot of people on Capitol Hill do, signing every letter that AIPAC puts out. On Iran, he's had some skepticism about the efficacy of sanctions, which I think is pretty well-founded because we've heaped on sanctions and it hasn't worked yet. And he also has expressed concern about the potential consequences of a military strike, and that we haven't talked about that at all in our national discourse. I think that's a pretty well-founded concern, too. And so he's been repeatedly attacked for these things, was called an anti-Semite in the Weekly Standard and by a few Israel lobby groups. and it just kind of hasn't let up at all.
So let's go to the man himself. Let's go first to Chuck Hagel on Iraq. After initially supporting the war, as you said, Hagel became a vocal critic. In 2007, he joined Democrats opposing President Bush's troop surge.
There is no strategy. This is a ping-pong game with American lives. These young men and women that we put in Anbar province, in Iraq, in Baghdad, are not beans. They're real lives. And we better be damn sure we know what we're doing, all of us, before we put 22,000 more Americans into that grinder.
That was Senator Hagel speaking in 2007. That same year, he was questioned by Sam Husseini of Washington's Stakeout about Iraq.
Do you regret your war vote, and do you think the administration believed bad intelligence, or did they work to rig it?
Well, if you're referring to the resolution, the Iraq War Resolution 2002, that was not a resolution to go to war. That was a resolution that would empower the President of the United States to take military action if it was the last course of action he could take, the last resort, after exhausting all the diplomatic efforts. So I think we need to be clear on that. It wasn't a resolution to go to war or not go to war. Second, your question about do I regret it? Yes, if I had to vote again, I would vote against it. The fact is that the war in Iraq was a war of choice. Saddam Hussein was not an imminent threat to the United States or anyone else. The fact is containment was working. The fact is that he didn't control 60% of his country. We had overflights in the north and the south. Those were F-16s that would fly out of Saudi Arabia. The fact is he was slowly strangling in the 40% of his country. That was a needless commitment of American blood and treasure. And if that vote was held again today, I'd vote against it.
That was Chuck Hagel. Ali Gharib.
Yeah, I think that sort of skepticism about that he showed later on Iraq is exactly why a lot of his critics are attacking him on Iran. You had this really funny thing where Abraham Foxman, the head of the Anti-Defamation League, came out in two separate interviews on the same day a few weeks ago, and in one of them he said that Hagel's comments about the quote-unquote Jewish lobby were borderline anti-Semitic, and on the other one he said it sounds like he's open to the military option on Iran, so we don't see any reason to oppose him.
I've got the quote, Abe Foxman of the Anti-Defamation League issuing this statement about Hagel's possible appointment. He said, quote, Chuck Hagel would not be the first, second, or third choice for the American Jewish community's Friends of Israel. His record relating to Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship is at best disturbing and at worst very troubling. The sentiments he's expressed about the Jewish lobby border on anti-Semitism in the genre of Professors John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt and former President Jimmy Carter.
Right, and on the same day that he made that statement, he did an interview with this Israeli newspaper called The Times of Israel, where he said that Chuck Hagel has come around to the president's position on supporting keeping the military option on Iran open, and therefore there wasn't enough cause for concern to oppose his nomination as defense secretary. So that kind of gives you an idea of what all this Israel and Iran rhetoric has been all about, and it's about taking a hawkish perspective on Iran. And I think a lot of those people are in for kind of a rude awakening, because as we've seen from some of these videos that you've been showing, Chuck Hagel is not a guy who's exactly averse to saying out loud what he's thinking.
I want to take on another issue. During an appearance on MSNBC's Meet the Press last month, President Obama was asked about comments Senator Hagel made 14 years ago regarding President Clinton's nominee for ambassador to Luxembourg, James Hormel. Senator Hagel had questioned his qualifications for the position because he was, quote, openly, aggressively gay, unquote. Hagel apologized for the remark last month. This is President Obama's response.
With respect to the particular comment that you quoted, he apologized for it. And I think it's a testimony to what has been a positive change over the last decade in terms of people's attitudes about gays and lesbians serving our country. And that's something that I'm very proud to have led. And I think that anybody who serves in my administration understands my attitude and position on those issues.
That's President Obama. Ali Gharib, your response?
Yeah, and, you know, there's been some lingering sort of gay rights lobby groups and individuals who oppose Chuck Hagel, but some of the larger groups, Human Rights Campaign, which is probably the most influential gay equality group in Washington, came around after Hagel's apology and said that they now welcome him into the fold and consider him an ally for gay equality. And there are...
Ambassador Hamel was not as generous.
He wasn't as generous. He gave sort of an equivocal acceptance of Hagel's apology, where he said he suggested strongly that it was out of political expediency, but said he hopes that the remarks are genuine and that he really has come around. So it's been a mixed bag for Hagel with a lot of the gay groups. There was a Ambassador Guest, who was another Clinton ambassador in the late 90s, wrote an op-ed today in Politico. He was another openly gay ambassador, where he said he worked with Chuck Hagel and that he didn't take great issue with him. And these are progressive concerns with Hagel's record that should be addressed in a confirmation hearing. There's the issue of gay equality, which does bear on personnel issues in the military, because now there's open service there, and also LGBT family rights for service members. And then, you know, there are other issues like Hagel's opposition to abortion. He's previously opposed a bill that ended up passing that allows women service members to obtain abortions on base hospitals, even paying out of their own pocket. Hagel opposed that, and so he should be vigorously questioned on those matters. And another one would be climate change, because he's sort of dabbled in climate change skepticism, but again, it's a mixed record, and he's gone back and forth. And with the Pentagon being such a huge consumer of fossil fuels and polluter, it's really important that these are legitimate progressive concerns that should be addressed in confirmation by liberal senators.
On the USA Patriot Act?
On the USA Patriot Act, I believe he voted for it, and has some and does have lingering concerns about those things.
But voted against restoring habeas corpus to all prisoners detained at Guantanamo.
Yeah. So it's a mixed record, and those things should be carefully examined.
President Obama choosing a Republican to head defense? I mean, he had Gates before. Is there a sense that Republicans are better on so-called defense or on war in the Obama administration?
Yeah, well, you know, this has been an issue that I've been kind of arguing about with a lot of my liberal Democratic friends. I'm not really a partisan myself, so I could care less which party holds cabinet positions. But for a lot of them, I think it's a point of pride, especially because this has been a continuing Republican attack against the Democrats, is that they're weak on national security issues, and that's led a lot of Democrats to pick Republicans for these posts. I'm personally not that concerned about it, and there were some really great liberal Democratic candidates for this job who would have been good. I do think that for the kind of unique challenges of the next 2 years, withdrawing from Afghanistan, paring down the military budget, and getting a sensible American policy on Iran, these are some of our biggest upcoming challenges as a country. I actually think Hagel is pretty well suited to those, and especially on something like paring down the defense budget. I'm not so sure that a liberal Democrat would be able to work Republican members of Congress to build alliances the same way on those issues, and generally, you know, pull the levers of Washington to get defense cuts through. And so, you know, it's entirely possible that a Michelle Flournoy or an Ashton Carter could have...
Can you explain who Michelle Flournoy is?
Sorry, Michelle Flournoy is a former number 3 at the Pentagon, and Ashton Carter is the current number 2, and they were both frequently named as the 2 other likely candidates for the post. And, you know, it's entirely possible that both of them could have done the job, but the politics of cutting the defense budget being what they are, I think that it is probably going to be politically helpful to have a conservative Republican in that role.
I want to thank you very much, Ali Gharib, senior editor for Open Zion, a Middle East blog at the Daily Beast website, and we'll link to it at democracynow.org. When we come back, we go to the rape case in Steubenville, Ohio, where a 16-year-old woman was gang raped by members of the local high school football team. Anonymous hacked the website of one of the football team members and put it out, a video online, has young men talking about what happened to this woman. Stay with us. Loma, Fabrizio Paterlini. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Following the death of a young rape victim that galvanized tens of thousands of protesters in India, we turn now to a case of sexual violence here in the United States that has only recently generated national attention, though it happened months ago. That's the case of Steubenville, Ohio, where members of a high school football team allegedly raped an underage girl, possibly urinated on her unconscious body over the course of an evening of partying in late August. The young men chronicled their actions on social media sites such as Facebook and Twitter, using words such as drunk girl rape in their posts. One former football player tweeted, quote, "Song of the night is definitely Rape Me by Nirvana," and, quote, "Some people deserve to be peed on." In one video, an 18-year-old laughs about how unconscious the alleged rape victim was during the incident and refers to her as, quote, "the dead girl."
And is it really rape because you don't know if she wanted to or not? She might have wanted to. That might have been her final wish.
No, you don't think she's dead?
She's dead.
Before many of the partygoers could delete their incriminating posts, local crime blogger Alexandria Goddard made copies and publicized them on her website. She was sued for defamation, but the charges have since been dropped. Many Steubenville locals have criticized Goddard and the victim for bringing negative public attention to the football team. Head football coach Reno Sacochia has refused to bench his players and reportedly advised them to delete any incriminating messages. Well, now the cyber activist group Anonymous has launched a campaign to unmask what they say is the football crazy town's attempt to cover up the sexual assault. Last month, the group hijacked the football team's website and threatened to release the personal data of school officials, coaches, and every player on the team if those involved in the suspected rape did not publicly apologize. In August, after the girl's parents reported the suspected rape, 2 football players were arrested and later charged with kidnapping and raping the 16-year-old woman. They are scheduled to stand trial as juveniles in February. However, on Saturday, Sheriff Fred Abdullah told protesters no more suspects would be charged in the rape case. Amidst boos from the crowds, Abdullah defended his department's commitment to prosecuting sexual offenders.
When I came into this office, I made a commitment to myself. When you come in 1985, that I would go after those people that have raped or those people that have sexually abused our young children. In the last 28 years, me and my officers, Captain Bell, have arrested over 200 plus individuals for sexually abusing children. And we taught our children about strangers all the time.
That was Sheriff Fred Abdullah, who's under fire for his handling of the Steubenville High School rape investigation. For more, we're joined by 3 guests in Raleigh, North Carolina. Monica Johnson-Hassler is with us. She's president of the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence. Here in New York, we're joined by Kristen Gwynn, associate editor at Alternet. Her recent piece is called How Anonymous Hacking Exposed Steubenville High School Rape Case. And by Democracy Now! Video stream, we're joined by X, a member of the hacktivist group Anonymous, using a pseudonym. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! I want to begin with our guest here in the studio in New York. Kristen, explain how this case, because the actual attack occurred in August, how we've come to learn about it now in January.
Well, the blogger Alexandria Goddard, she was on the case from the beginning. She's from Steubenville, Ohio, and so she had been following the details of it and actually tracing tweets from football players and athletes at the school almost immediately after the charges were filed in August. And she garnered the attention of the community on her blog, and even in the comment section, a lot of people were weighing in, either saying that, yes, this is a football-crazed town, or actually blaming the victim for what allegedly happened to her. And after her blogging, the New York Times wrote an article about it just a month ago, chronicling again the events of the evening and the possibility that more people were involved. And
what is believed that took place that night?
Well, according to both the New York Times and Anonymous, what they're saying happened was that a 16-year-old girl who was from a neighboring town in West Virginia was taken to a series of parties celebrating the end of the summer and the beginning of the football season. She was intoxicated or possibly date raped and unconscious even at one point, being carried by football players from party to party and allegedly sexually assaulted and raped both at parties and in between. Anonymous is saying that the sexual assaults may even have happened at the homes of assistant coaches to the football team as well as the prosecutor.
I mean, the picture that has come out of two men holding this girl, dragging her, to a man holding her arms and a man holding her legs. I wanted to bring into the conversation Monica Johnson-Hostler. If you can respond to what you have seen and heard described in this case, the fact that the police chief is saying there will be no more indictments. There have been 2 young men who've been charged, and they will be tried as juveniles in a few weeks.
Yes, thank you for having me, Amy. I think my response is like most people's. It's a guttural response that this is a violent, heinous act right here in the United States, where it appears that for those of us who are not in Ohio, it's taken a little bit longer for us to get the details that Christy just described for us. And based on that description, I think most of us know if this was any other type of case where there were onlookers or other people, that we would be considering and holding those people who also witnessed and also were a part of engaging in sexually assaulting or dragging this young woman from party to party as aiding and abetting, or at least responsible in some capacity criminally as well.
Isn't some of this alleged to have happened at the home of the Jefferson County prosecutor, Kristen?
Yes, that's what
Monica.
That's what I understand, that it was held at the home of a prosecutor. And what I can say for the community in the state of Ohio is it seemed early on the police chief at the time, not the sheriff, but was readily open and willing for the attorney general to come in and take the case, which I think is more than appropriate, considering here in North Carolina, I'm from a small town where everyone does know everyone and football is paramount to the community, that it's extremely important that there be someone outside that community engaged in the criminal prosecution of this case.
Jane Hamlin, who is the Jefferson County prosecutor, has recused herself from the case, presumably because of her son.
Yes, and as has the local judge, who said that his granddaughter had been in a relationship with one of the accused.
And what is the family of the victim saying? Did the young woman say she didn't even realize what had happened, that she had no memory of that night?
She said she didn't remember anything pretty much after leaving her home, and that it wasn't until she heard from friends and saw the pictures herself that she understood, or began to understand, and I guess pieced together what had happened to her that night.
I want to turn to the activist from Anonymous, to X, a pseudonym for security reasons. Can you tell us what it is that you did, that your group did?
Hi, Amy. Thanks for having me on today. I think to begin with, it's important to understand that this action involved 3 separate entities that are overlapping and coordinated but separate. The cyber action, which involved the hacking and the various other cyber aspects, were conducted by Anonymous in a very specific cell within Anonymous known as NightSec. And then the ground protests, which took place on 2 Saturdays in a row, this last Saturday and the one before, were handled by Occupy Steubenville. So that was their responsibility. And then the third sort of part of the puzzle was LocalLeaks, which is the disclosure platform that we have, which released just a copious amount of information on this case. And so it's important to understand that those 3 elements were involved.
I just want to say, especially for radio listeners who cannot see, that you're wearing a Guy Fawkes mask and your head is covered. Your voice is masked, as well as your name. Why are you doing this anonymously?
For security purposes, actually, I've been on your show before. The last time I was on the air, I was still anonymous with a small a, and I was apprehended shortly after I appeared on your show last time by the FBI. And for a number of reasons, because I felt that the prosecution was political against myself, I chose to flee into exile, and I'm in Canada now. And so my name is actually known to most people. You could research me and easily find out who I am. My appearance is masked because I've altered my appearance since I've gone into exile, and I'm now a fugitive. So I've altered my appearance. But I keep the name X because, to be honest with you, I kind of like it.
How did you get a hold? Explain the video that your group, that Anonymous, that you got a hold of, that you released, what this 12-minute video showed.
Well, I think it's apparent to anybody who can stomach watching it for the entire 12 minutes. I myself here at our location, we've been working night and day on this operation, and I've watched it at least a dozen times, and it makes me sick each time you watch it. I think it speaks for itself. These young men were sitting around immediately after the crime took place. That's clear from what they say in the video. One person even gets up at one point and leaves in disgust and goes to check on the victim to see if the victim is okay. So the victim is still nearby, still the crime is still in progress in essence when this video was shot. And a number of people are implicated in the video, including the subject of the video, Michael Narianos, implicates himself in this crime. So I think the video speaks for itself, and I can't imagine how the police do not see this as further evidence and do not levy charges against the people in the video.
What are you, Monica, calling for right now? Right now, 2 young people have been charged. There's a lot of community support for the football players. Wasn't there reference in the video to Duke and the lacrosse players?
There was, and very much so, like X said, I had to actually watch the 12-minute video in increments because it was sickening to my stomach to hear men, especially of this age, talk about how dead she was. And one of them, I think, even alluded to, if this was your daughter or your wife in 10 years, you wouldn't be saying this. And he said, yes, I would. So for me, especially as a parent, not just as an advocate, it is sickening to hear the degree of which they go on and carry on about how much she was raped. And so the correlation to Duke was she was raped more than the Duke lacrosse players raped.
And so what
we are calling for is not just how this is handled in Steubenville, Ohio, but really asking America to take a hard look at ourselves and how we are handled sexual violence and rape in our country. I think we've been able to point our fingers and turn our heads to rapes that have happened in other countries and not held ourselves accountable as Americans to say that we absolutely still have a culture of rape where women and girls are still degraded and dehumanized, and rape is in the fabric of this country. And unfortunately, I would think centuries later that we would be further along in terms of our response, but yet we still see Americans blaming victims. So in terms of our overall response, we're calling for America to take a hard look at itself and really think about the culture that we're raising our kids in and the things that we are allowing to happen by not acknowledging as a community, as a society, the importance of supporting the rape victim. And I do want to go back briefly to something you asked Christy earlier about the rape victim recalling her story or what happened. And what I'd like to point out to your listeners and viewers is oftentimes rape victims don't consider what happened to them rape. Just as Christy described, in this case, she was intoxicated, inebriated, that she wasn't able to actually recall what happened, which is often the case that we hear with drug-facilitated or alcohol-facilitated rapes. And so I think it's important for people to understand before we begin to blame the victim, when a victim recalls their story in pieces, it is often because of cases like this where it's difficult to recall the incidents that happen, especially when they're intoxicated or inebriated.
Kristen, can you talk about the role of social media in exposing the story? First, Alexandria, the blogger, then Anonymous.
Social media has played an interesting role in the story from the beginning because without it, just prosecuting the case at all would have been difficult because so much of the evidence was tweets and Facebook posts and videos that kids put up on YouTube. And what Alexandria Goddard did was take screenshots of everything before the kids were smart enough, I guess, to realize that they needed to delete them. So she was able to compile evidence that...
And who is she?
She was a blogger for the website Prinnyfield.com, and she was also from the town. So she had, I guess, a personal interest in investigating further because she said from the minute she heard about the case, she believed that the football players were being treated specially because the town has so much invested in the team. And then once Anonymous caught hold of it, they took it even further by exposing more tweets, and then, of course, the video, which was just a stunning, I guess, testament to the rape culture in America and in this town in particular.
Finally, X, or Christopher Doyon, your name that's online. Can you talk about OpPedoChat and talk about, well, I'm looking at Wired magazine. It could indicate this is the project of one subsection of Anonymous, which would explain the slightly different tone to the information release. This isn't the first anti-pedophile project from the group either. And then it goes on to talk about the past ones.
Sure, Amy, I'll be happy to, but I just want to point out one last thing on the Steubenville subject. There's more to this than just a rape that's being covered up because of football and because of legitimate revenue within that community. Anonymous has uncovered a gigantic gambling ring in Steubenville that is probably half of the revenue in that community is underground, and it involves gambling, involves drugs. So there's more to this than this. This story is about corruption. It's about a sick fascination and fixation with football, and so I encourage people to go to local leaks and look at the information that we've revealed, because this goes deeper than just rape. Regarding OpPedoChat,
we have 10 seconds.
OpPedoChat is an operation by Anonymous to uncover pedophiles on social media and to out them and to get them removed from social media and hopefully arrested and convicted for their crimes.
Well, Christopher Doyon, a.k.a. Commander X, I want to thank you for being with us, activist with the activist group Anonymous. Also, thank you to Monica Johnson-Hostler with the National